AI is often really, really good at doing like a bigger one shot on something, rather than just banging your head against a wall. It tends to just make things worse and worse and worse because of like context usage and all that. So it's like, okay, no, like you tried it, it failed. Don't iterate. Go back to your prompt, refine the prompt, get your lessons learned, and then one shot it again, and then see what you get. So it's different.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast, where we talk to the people who keep the internet safe. These industry experts share their innovative cyber defense technologies, vital insights into threats, and predictions for the future of cybersecurity. My name is Christopher Luft. I'm one of the co-founders of LimaCharlie, and I will be your host. This podcast is brought to you by LimaCharlie, maker of the SecOps Cloud platform, infrastructure for SecOps where everything is built API first. Scale with confidence as your business grows. Start today for free at limacharlie.io. Now let's get into it. This is a very special episode of the Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast. It is the first episode of 2026, so Happy New Year, and it's very good to be back on this microphone. But it's also special because of what I want to talk about today. We've covered AI as it relates to security a lot over the last year, how attackers are leveraging it, what analysts think about it, what AI red teamers are doing, and of course, how defenders are leveraging it. One thing we haven't covered, because it didn't quite feel like it fit in the security context, is how people are building with it. What has become so crystal clear to me and the team at LimaCharlie over the last quarter is that LLMs are emerging as a new type of operator. And I'm not going to get into the philosophy and ramifications of that larger statement because we're hosting a major event on January 20th with a bunch of industry experts to go into this in depth. But I do want to talk about the experience of working with these tools and technologies over the last couple of years and hopefully shine some light into this rapidly evolving set of tools for anybody listening. If you like what you hear on this podcast and would like to join us for our event on January 20th, you can visit limacharlie.io/ASW and register there. And a caveat I want to make here before we start is that there is so much going on. I'm not saying what we are going to share here is the best way. It simply draws from our experience and the journey we've taken. And joining me for the conversation is my good friend and business partner, the founder and CEO of LimaCharlie, Maxime Lamothe-Brassard. Max, thanks so much for joining me to do this. I'm very excited to talk about this.
Same here. I love to talk about it. It's super interesting. So it's going to be good.
Yeah. So I guess let's go all the way back to the beginning. I want to think it was probably end of 2022, maybe 2023 that we started playing around with AI. I think I started building a little RAG system for our documentation, and we were kind of like, oh, what's this thing everybody's talking about? What's your memory from that time?
It's a good question. It's kind of all fuzzy, right? Because in a weird way, it's happening so fast. But we've also covered a lot of ground over those years. For me, I think the main thing that sticks out in my mind was actually the very first tool calls from LLMs, right? Like I remember seeing ChatGPT for the first time and like how impressive that was. But it was very clearly a chatbot, and so with everything that goes along with that, and then somebody, I forget exactly who it was, but like going and reading about this idea that like, hey, they're going to kind of rig some tool calls within this. And I feel like that was the initial spark, because it meant it wasn't just like, a mind in a bubble, but now it was going to be able to do stuff. And that was super weird. And then, yeah, the RAG came in. Yeah, what I remember then is the tooling was just so basic, right?
Right. And I feel like the hallucination problem was way worse. Like, I think theoretically that's never going to go away entirely. But I remember those early models, it was like, oh, this is super cool. And then what? Like, doesn't make sense at all. So like, as much as I want to use this in like a real world scenario, it just couldn't be trusted at all. And I think we still have to approach it with like, caution and suspicion. But I do think that problem's gotten a lot better.
Yeah, that's right. It was just every step of the way. And you remember the amount of like prompt engineering to try to put around your like access or processing of the RAG stuff. And I remember one of the big kind of realizations that you had back then, and when we were playing with that was, okay, it sounds like it would be really cool to have an LLM process the documentation and answer a question. But yeah, it's not happening. Even with RAG, the only way we could get it to be reliable was really for it to find you the right documentation, right? Instead of just telling you.
Yeah, that's how I worked around the problem. It would, instead of trying to answer your question, it would find what it thought was the best documentation article and then return that. So we were having, a fuzzy search and a deterministic outcome.
That's right. It's better than nothing, but when you think of the sort of like the promise of what's exceptional about LLMs, that's pretty far from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think if before we even got anywhere near like a CLI tool, ChatGPT had created this concept of like custom GPTs. And so you were able to like save essentially a prompt that the LLM would read when it booted up for a specific task you were doing. And it's funny because the podcast was the first thing I ever used that for. We do the Intel chats, and I used to manually write the script from the articles, and it was really time consuming. I must love doing the podcast because it was eat up all my evenings all the time just getting that stuff ready. And then I built this bot that I could just dump the article into, and it would give me a nice summary and a little break for Matt to talk. And now, I read the articles, but the transformation into the script is basically an automated process, and it's really shortened the time and allowed me to do the podcast consistently weekly while not eating up all my time and stressing me out in my life. So I think that was the first real productivity gain that got me excited about this. And I look back now and it seems so basic to where we are today.
Mm-hmm. And you see, for me, I think that era was a lot of kind of disappointment in that I remember trying to use the APIs, and you could, but you kind of had to string the messages, convert, every interaction into like a message format. And then, well, if you want to suspend this or resume it, you have to refeed all the messages every time. And then, the early kind of tool calls, you had to stitch the tool calls in the message list. So I think I got benefits in my day-to-day later than you did maybe there. And that's probably because I was doing, less writing, right? Which English writing is kind of scenario number one for LLMs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a natural language processor, so that makes sense, right?
That's right. I think the first real value that I got beyond ChatGPT every now and then was in Cursor and VS Code. Actually, I think it started with VS Code when it started to do autocomplete of the next line, and it just started out as this is a really good autocomplete. And then, a couple weeks later, it was like, oh, it's completing a whole code block. That's pretty cool. And then it just kind of exploded from there.
And I'm trying to think back to we've got AI integrated into the LimaCharlie platform in quite a few different ways natively now. And I'm trying to think back to what the first use case was. Was that rule transformation? I'm trying to remember what we did there first.
I think it was. I think that was kind of the first integration into the product that we did with AI, and we did a ton of iteration on that because the first few versions were, marginally better than random.
They would get you a start, but you still needed to get your hands in there to make it all work properly.
Exactly. For us, I think the big challenge was that you could take the LLM. It didn't necessarily know how to query the data natively. You could teach it that, but then it didn't know natively what the data looks like. And so, you could ask it to generate a detection for Okta data. And it's like, what's Okta, right? It didn't know. It didn't have the built-in tools to go on the web and figure it out. There's no canonical like definition for very often for that stuff. So yeah, the first few versions were really bad, and then we engineered a bunch of process around it and got it to a pretty good state. But for me, that wasn't. It's good. Like, don't get me wrong. It's a great thing and it's really useful, but it wasn't that exciting because it still felt like an extension of ChatGPT in a sense that like, you know, you dump a bunch of things in a context window and it's a big pot. You put the ingredients in there and you kind of hope that as you stir, like the right thing comes out, right? It's how I feel about it.
Yeah. But it was good because it got us, as a team really sort of getting our hands in there and starting to play around with it. And I think something that's very important for people maybe listening to this who are curious about it is like, this is moving so fast. It's almost like, I don't know if you remember, I really struggled with math in junior high because I kind of fell behind at the end of elementary school. I missed some stuff. And so when I tried to get back in, it was incredibly hard because it had advanced so much. And I think that's really the case here because, being in it for so long now, it's so exciting and it's moving so quick. I had a conversation with Eric Capuano this morning and we just spent an hour data dumping into each other, things we didn't know about because we're both on our own little narrow slice of this stuff, but it's moving so fast. So it's, whatever you're doing, there's a lot of free tiers and stuff out there. Just start playing with it and try and keep up because it's moving so quick.
It's moving quick. The content and the operationalization, the tools, like all that moves very quickly. But even beyond that, I would say that there's also a philosophical shift that or like a mental shift that you need to have as you work more with it.
Right.
And for me, the big comparison that I think about is when I started working with the cloud, right? With cloud providers, the capabilities where you kind of went from a world where you were thinking about like, hey, I've got these servers and they have like a hard drive in them and that's my data center. That's the shape of it. What am I going to install on these servers? And then you talk about shifting to a world where it's like, well, it's all autoscalers. You have infinite CPU if you want it, whether it's for 5 seconds or 3 hours, it's up to you. And there's no hard drives in those machines. Like obviously you have infinite bandwidths to infinite number of hard drives. So you have to like break your old assumptions when you work with AI, not about everything, but about a lot of things that, you used to think, I think the big one that comes to mind is like the iteration part, right?
Right.
Oh, I'm going to build a little thing and then I'm going to keep iterating on it. And, as you talk to a lot of people, you kind of realize that, AI is often really, really good at doing like a bigger one shot on something. Rather than just banging your head against a wall, it tends to just make things worse and worse and worse because of context usage and all that. So it's like, okay, no, like you tried it, it failed. Don't iterate. Go back to your prompt, refine the prompt, get your lessons learned, and then one shot it again, and then see what you get. So it's different.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think maybe that captures it more. What I was thinking, like, the technology is moving very fast, but it's more like the way you're thinking about interfacing with it is what has to keep up because
right.
It has shifted completely how I think about building things. That's a good point. So we put the first thing in the app, and then I think maybe CLI tools came next, or was it MCP? I think CLI started to show up before the MCP servers did.
Yeah, I think it was probably pretty close. But certainly the MCP came out and we jumped on that super quickly because again, the promise was amazing. Like there's a small theme here. So like the promise was amazing and we played with the CLI tools. And that was also a very different paradigm shift. I think the CLI tools, how did you live kind of that shift from the chat, like the typical chatbot ChatGPT into the CLI tool?
That's a good question. I think you first pinged me about it. You were like, hey, you got to check this out. And I think the first one I might have tried. Yeah, it was Claude. I'm pretty sure it was Claude. And it took a minute, right? Because you come into these things, and I think I was initially using Claude the way I was using ChatGPT. And it just felt like a new interface for the same thing. And again, just like experimenting and playing with it. I think the first thing that I came to, I started using something called semantic modules, the way I was structuring my code. Like I when I was educated in computer science, we learned about object-oriented programming. And so I've always had this like model of inheritance and stuff, the way I think about code. And LLMs, I find, are very bad at some of that. Like, again, like if you're trying to work on a large concept iteratively, which might not be the best way to do these things, it makes you'll try and change one thing and it'll change something else. And then you'll kind of go crazy trying to track down all the things that are changing. And so I started trying to write code as individual files with almost like an event bus. And so instead of like a method, I'd have one file that contained all the logic around one very narrow use case. And I found that I could talk to the LLM in a way that would change this one narrow function in a way that was useful and didn't break anything else. And so it changed the way I started thinking about code structure. But then over time, and I started to realize, and again, this is maybe the nuanced mental shift where instead of asking it to write some code, I just started using it as an extension for what I would normally do, if that makes sense. Like I was kind of offloading some of the brain power, but also some of the operational knowledge about like doing things in the command line.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. That was huge for me too. When it started to be, I think that the best example for me is, it's kind of a joke, right? That people learn 2 commands with Git. And then like, if you need anything else, you have to go and Google it. Very quickly,
I feel attacked.
You feel seen. I'm exactly the same. And like very quickly, Claude Code the bar was low, was way better than me at working with Git. And so there's a ton of things where in the past, I would have, spent 10 minutes like Googling the thing, creating a copy of the repo, and then I really quickly ended up getting comfortable enough to just say, hey, you know what? I want this commit to actually go to this other branch, and not having a plan at all in my head of like how it should do that with Git. But I knew that, I could tell it like, this is my intent, like just make it happen. And it was doing it and it was working. So that was kind of like one of the really cool accelerator things for me. With Claude, but I think the biggest reason that I ended up having a lot of affinity with Claude, although at first I didn't like it, because I come from IDE world, right? Where you want to see your code, and then the early Claude code, you couldn't really see much of the code changes and all of that, but it had one thing that was just so nice, which was the ability to just multiplex it in different terminals. And I think this was particularly effective to convince me because I'm on a lot of calls during the day. I end up, going and talking to a lot of people. And so it meant that there's a ton of small things that they don't require that much complexity or brain power, but you need to sit down and get it, doing the thing. And now I could just like open, 4 windows. Oh yeah, do this. And then, over my meeting, it would go and do it. And then I get the results after. So I was just kind of able to cram more of the boring work in the background as I did the rest of my day.
Mm-hmm. And just to get back to MCP servers, the promise of that was essentially, and for people listening, a model context protocol. It's sort of the LLM's layer over top of existing APIs. In the promise is that you no longer have to worry about backwards compatibility because the AIs can just talk to each other and figure it out, and it's all fuzzy and wonderful and it works. And that was definitely the experience. But one of the problems we ran into early, I know, is there's this issue with MCP servers that you have this context window in LLMs, which is essentially like the amount of brain power that they have. That's the easiest way I can think about it. And if you use up too much of that brain power, they start to get dumb because they can make less connections and draw less conclusions and stuff. And so you have this context window. And I think talking to my friend Rich Hyman, he told me that the performance starts to drop off around 55,000 tokens or something like that. And because LimaCharlie's API is so vast and we're able to do so many things through it, when we put that all into the MCP format, as soon as you loaded the tool, it used 70,000 tokens. So like the LLM would still work, but we were taking up so much of the context before we got started that we were like suffering from some performance issues right away.
That's right. And it forced you. I think it explains why there's a lot of MCP servers that are really, I don't mean simple. It's not the right word, but they have very few tools because of that problematic. And I think it's encouraging all of the wrong things. And pre-Claude Code, I would say that was a theoretical problem. And then Claude Code came out, and in my mind, it kind of proved it. What I mean here is, if you, I have a company, I make, I don't know, a CRM or, whatever type of tools, and I need an MCP server, and it's really costly to have tools in terms of tokens in my MCP server. I'm going to be pushed towards making few tools that kind of wrap a lot of behavior into it, right? Like instead of having a create record, read record, delete record. Well, I'm going to make one tool that is, update customer and its dependencies. And then I'm, going to cram a ton of things behind that one tool. And I think a lot of people used to favor that approach because of the MCP limitation, also because the models weren't that good. So it kind of allowed you to impose some of your will on the LLM and say, no, don't create, delete, list records. Like you're just going to get lost if you do that. This is like the intent that is supported here. And so that used to be, used to be like a year ago, I feel like kind of like the way to do it.
Way back in the old days.
Right. And now we've caught up with Claude Code that the models have gotten so much better. Claude Code is able to use so many CLI tools, like in your local environment. And so I think it in my mind, it has proved that the models are now good enough to orchestrate their own way of doing things in order to get to the outcome that you're looking for. And so it's kind of like, as a side effect of that, made a bigger problem of the MCP protocol, because now you're kind of saying, well, if you want to use MCP, you really want to have a ton of tools available, but you can't. So like something's got to give, right?
Hey, it's Nicole from the LimaCharlie marketing team. Many security teams deal with tool sprawl, dozens of different solutions that create gaps in visibility and slow down response times. Our SecOps Cloud platform consolidates your security stack into a unified platform where everything works together. LimaCharlie gives you comprehensive endpoint visibility and automated response capabilities in milliseconds instead of minutes, so you can stop threats before they spread across your environment. Try our scalable infrastructure for your security services for free at limacharlie.io.
It's really interesting for me because, we ran into this problem with running out of context in the MCP, and I think a lot of other people were doing the same thing too. And so we started thinking about like, could we do progressive tool disclosure? And I think we started building our own solution to this. And then Claude came out with something called Skills, which is, you can see being adopted by other CLI tools in the LLM, frontier model environment. I think ChatGPT just launched one. Gemini has a similar version of something like that. So maybe do you want to just explain Skills and what they bring and how they sort of defeat that problem?
Sure. So like to dig a little bit more into the problem, I think it will help explain it. we're talking about, an MCP server is all or nothing, right? All of the tools must be all into context at once or not. So that's kind of the design of MCP. So if you think functionally in terms of like, okay, what would be, the right way to go and do this, kind of conceptually what you would like is you would like to be able to tell the LLM, hey, here's a short, description of the tools that you have access to. You don't need the full definition of how everything works. But if you encounter one of those, like the need for one of those, you have enough to know, I need to know more about this. And then you find out kind of the whole context of how this one tool works. And you can, because, you don't have all the other tools in there, you can really expand on how that one tool works. And so that's the concept when we talk about progressive disclosure is, I want my MCP server to kind of disclose progressively the content of the tools that are available to the LLM. So what the skills are doing, they are taking an extremely open and neutral approach to that, a really minimal approach. And that's why I love that, that's the approach they've taken. Look, if this was a cybersecurity tool, they would have created a, I don't know, man, like cyber tool TM, tool that you need to sign up an MSA with the vendor to get
Bald
access
Eagle
to.
Suite.
Oh my God.
Pro Edition.
So I love that instead the skills, they just said, you know what? LLMs process text. So the skills are going to be a file that is in markdown format. It's got a header with this, description and a name. And then the description is the thing that gets read in your context. And then what's under that header is the thing that's going to get loaded dynamically. It's like the MVP of, I want progressive disclosure of tools. And so they just did that and it unlocked kind of everything all at once, because now you could have 100 skills. Only the short description gets injected into your context. So plenty of tokens left. And then the model is trained to know that, hey, I have a skill about, what's their like big examples they have is like creating a Word doc. Like I have a skill about creating a Word doc. Oh, okay. I need to create a Word doc. Let me go and read it. And then you can bundle a bunch of stuff with that skill. It's a directory. So you could have a Python script in there and you could tell your skill, use that Python script if you need it. So it's kind of like a good, way of encapsulating that behavior. It's a good pattern as opposed to the MCP, which kind of from the get-go, like we should have seen this coming, honestly. But hey,
but that's how we get there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's so true. The nature of where we are, right? Like nobody knows what they're doing in a funny way, right? So that's what's exciting about it too.
And I guess the next one that I think really pairs with this, which is I think when things really got exciting, and if you're on social media and you see like there's really been a shift in the last 6 months in my mind, but I'd say really in the last 2-3 months, like you can see this wave of people kind of having these moments with the LLMs and what they're able to do with it. And I think a big part of that is this concept of sub-agents, which, to my knowledge, I think Claude's really the only one doing it right now, which is sort of why we're planted firmly in that camp. And I'll briefly discuss it and pass it over to Max. So sub-agent just allows you have the agent you start the prompt with, and in these skills, you can tell it like, hey, go spin me up another agent and go do this for me and then bring me the result back. And so what makes this powerful is, one, you can do things in parallel. So something that sequentially would take a long time, you can do faster. So that's cool. But what's really cool, because we have to think about context as like RAM on a computer or some valuable limited resource, and you really want to preserve that in your process because it's going to make your LLM more effective. And what this means is like, in a security context, one that we work around all the time is like, hey, I want to get this information out of a bunch of logs and then do something with it. So instead of like getting my main LLM or my main agent to go consume all these logs and fill up its context window and then get dumb by the time I actually need it to do something for me, it can spin up sub-agents to go do that research, hone down the data, and then just return the piece that I'm looking for back. So again, with this progressive tool disclosure plus these sub-agents, I can really preserve that intelligence in this, master agent or whatever you want to call it, the main agent. And that becomes so powerful when you're working with this stuff.
It's magic. It's magic. And look, I think, you and I are into this like day in, day out. I'm taking that hat off for a second. And like, I recognize like this probably sounds kind of complicated to a lot of folks, right? If you're just like, you're using ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever, that probably sounds really complicated. I would just say sort of two things. One is like, it's really not that complicated. It maps to our world, I would say, right? If you're in a company and you're in a team, you don't do everything yourself, right? You give tasks to people in your team and like stuff like that. So like it maps well, I think, to how we think in general. And the other thing is, the risk here is to think that because you're using Claude, for example, like the web like version of Claude, that you mostly have the value that like we're talking about. Like I think there is a world of difference between, for technical people in a work context, there's a world of difference between like the chatbot Claude and something like Claude Code that has access to like the tools that you have locally. Like that sounds scary, but like there's permissions, all that stuff. Don't worry. But create a temp file and do something in there, and then write a quick Python script to process that. And like it's day and night.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you could really, it can lead you through it in a way, it becomes this sort of loop back, where you're learning as you're going, and it's exciting because you're making progress all the time. So yeah, don't be intimidated. Once you have these concepts in your mind and you get on the command line and you start playing around, you're going to get so excited that you won't be able to stop, which I think has been the problem for some of us who have been working till midnight again, like we're 20 years old.
Yeah, it's real. It's real, especially building software. The thing everybody I think is going to hit right away, right, is I can build all of this stuff. But it just means that, the code review, if you do code reviews, it ends up taking a lot of time. But even then, the testing it, right? It's not going to be perfect. Like when you and I write a piece of software, it's not perfect either. So it's not going to be perfect through the bot. You will have to test it. But there's kind of like that dopamine, hit of like, okay, I get to build and like see that progress. But I find often that like, okay, I need now to take time to go and test it. And I think, we're in the middle of that next big phase, right, of making sure that a lot of the way that we build things, we now bake in this tight feedback loop of being able to test it, right? Like unit tests in software development, for detection engineering, that's unit tests for detection engineering, right? Which hopefully like folks are able to live to. But even in the web, I think like we've got the plugins now that, you can connect to Chrome, for example. So I think we're kind of like slowly now closing that feedback loop, and it's going to get crazy.
Yeah. And I guess that's sort of that segues really nicely into the last newer thing that I want to talk about that I don't even fully understand yet. I've just been playing with it for the last couple of days and seeing it on social media. And my initial response is just like, wow, like this is sort of the next thing. And I can see it evolving into, again, another sort of standard and like, oh, this makes so much sense. It's going to become a new normalized thing. And that's the Ralph Wiggum loop. So I don't really know the history. I learned about it from one of the creators of Claude Code had posted some stuff on Reddit about how he's using it, and then I read a Medium article, and Claude has this idea of a marketplace, and in the marketplace there's plugins that you can subscribe to that kind of give these groups of skills to your Claude. So you can make your own skills, or you can go to the marketplace and subscribe to them, and so it's like tons of stuff to explore. Very cool. this Ralph Wiggum loop, or Ralph loop, I think it's called in the command line, lets you do, lets you declare the number of iterations and set these long running agentic loops that will run, test, and move you towards your success criteria. And so it's not useful for everything, but if you have cleanly defined success criteria, you can kick off this long running loop that can take days, even if you want, to solve really hard problems. And in the one example I read about that kind of blew my mind was some folks at, I think it was maybe a hackathon or something, or maybe just some folks on Twitter, but they basically rewrote a version, a software language like Go, using Gen Z slang. Which, it's kind of, for the lulz, but it also like demonstrates the power because, Go took engineers at Google, years, I'm sure, in like a long time. So I don't know if it's like building off of their work. Sure. But the fact that it could do it sort of for the lulz in a couple days with some developers is mind boggling.
Yeah, it is impressive. And it's exactly, that test loop thing, right? Mm-hmm. You see, I think it's super interesting. I haven't used it yet. I think it's because recently the things that I've been working on are really difficult. You have to be able to define almost deterministically your success criteria. Mm-hmm. And that can be pretty hard, especially if you have difficulty testing something. I don't think it's a hot take, but like I think this is a short-term hack. Because this is a reaction to a problem in the LLM, right? Which is you can tell an LLM, this is what I want to build. These are all of the steps. This is like what, how you're done. And you can do that. And today it's not going to work, right? For any sizable piece of work, it's going to do phase 1, 2, and then it's going to stop and say like, hey, I did phase 1 and 2. Like, do you want me to do the next one? And as harsh as you want to be to tell it that, everybody's going to die if it doesn't finish the whole thing, like it's just not going to happen. So that's where the Ralph loop is like a hack to just say like, just keep hammering at it, keep restarting it on that. Yeah. But like, I think we're going to get within the year, I would think we're going to get to being able to natively do, day-long runs of Claude code and those models without doing that. That's my take anyway.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think one thing, and you've heard me say this a bunch of times, but I'm going to say it here for everybody, is and this is well known. This isn't just my hot take. This is well known. Humans are very bad at a couple of things cognitively, like to put into context. And one of them is very long distances. So if I say like 3 meters or 100 meters, like you can kind of picture that in your head. But if I say 10,000 kilometers, like we don't have the wetware to make sense of that statement. And another thing we really struggle with is logarithm or exponential growth. So, 2, 4, 6, 8, 16. Okay, we're keeping up. But go Google something called the back half of the chessboard. And this was something I first heard about from Ray Kurzweil. And he's talking about the exponential growth of technology. And, so everybody's probably familiar with Moore's Law, started in like 1972 or 76. I can't remember exactly. But I think the premise was like every 18 months, the number of transistors on a computer chip are going to double and the cost of those chips is going to half. And that's been holding since. I think there's a couple of fuzzy points along the way, but like it's essentially been holding for, 40, 50 years. And it's incredible because what it means is that, as good as technology is today, in 18 months, it's going to be twice as good. And, we were talking to somebody from Google today, and like even observationally, they're seeing exponential growth in the performance of these models. And so what that means is as it continues to grow, the leaps between the improvements get bigger and bigger. So the chessboard example comes from that if you start with 2 grains on the first square or 1 grain on the first square and double it on the second square of the chessboard, so then you get 4 grains of rice, 8 grains of rice. by the time you get to the last square on the chessboard, you're talking about more rice than's grown on the planet in the last 10 years or something crazy like that. And the jumps between each successive square near the end of the chessboard just becomes so huge. And I do think we're going to see that in the performance of these models. So, Max says by the end of next year, I don't think we can really even imagine what it's going to be. Like, I think we can make pretty good predictions that it's going to be better and be able to do these things that are maybe, 10 feet out. But like, I honestly think that the performance gains and the combined with like innovative engineering and people's ability to string these things together is going to produce results that just like change everything. And it's like, it's scary and exciting. Yeah,
totally. And you know what, to me, the lesson is like the very pragmatic lesson from what I totally agree. I think every now and then for like Moore's Law, there was a time where we're like, oh, we're coming to an end. And humans find a way, right? Like, and I was seeing that documentary about the UV lithography that you're using to write the chips. It's insane. Like it's just a ridiculous human endeavor. But that somebody put their mind to it and did it. And so I totally agree with you. I think the practical takeaway I get from this is, don't put yourself or don't put somebody between you and that accelerating resource. And the models are this thing that is accelerating like crazy. If the more you put something in between your use and those models, the more problematic it is for you to adapt to the next best model, right? Like I think that one of the great examples was like how early Cloud Code was handling like Git stuff. I think there's a lot of code involved into that. And then over time, just removing that code because it turns out the model was way better than any code we can write to make it do, usage of Git. And so don't engineer some large piece of complicated software that goes and, multiplexes requests to different models, because the reality is, in 6 months, we're going to be, twice as far as this. And if you have to try to adapt your code to, do all of this, it's going to be problematic. So I think it was also, sorry, I talk a lot about that because I like it a lot, but like it was the Cloud Code, right? That they kind of famously said, I think the person who started the project said, we built it for the models that were going to come out in 6 months. And I think that's not edging your bets on the future, that's being conservative in a weird way, right? Because by the time the humans here get to, deliver this thing, it's going to be 6 months and the things are going to be crazy anyway.
Yeah. Awesome, Max. This was a really fun conversation. I'm glad we did it completely unscripted and just talked about all the things. And it's really interesting to reflect on how much has changed and how quickly, and also like I want to pitch our January 20th event. Come see what we're building, man. It's really exciting. I promised I wouldn't give away anything, so I'm not going to spill any of the sauce, but I think if you come with an understanding of where this technology is at and have that discussion with us and see what we're building, you're going to get pretty excited because things are changing and it's exciting. And I think if we do it right, it's going to make everybody a lot safer and make everybody's life a lot easier.
That's right. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. And that brings us to the end of another great conversation. You can support our show by sharing your favorite episode with a friend, subscribe, give us a rating, or leave a comment on your favorite podcast platform. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can join our community forum at community.limacharlie.io. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you on the next one. The Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast is hosted and produced by Christopher Luft. The show is co-produced and edited by Sam Blake with graphics by Amr Al-Khatib. Sponsored by LimaCharlie, scalable infrastructure for your security services. Visit limacharlie.io to get started for free.